Nepal is in massive turmoil. What began as an online fury against banning of social media platforms has turned into a full-scale regime change operation. The Prime Minister KP Oli it is reportedly he's fled the country. He had to be evacuated in a helicopter. Massive violence going on all around. The mob is ruling the streets. So what exactly happened with Nepal? Because KP Oli, he said that this regulation against the social media platforms was as per the directives of the Supreme Court, and they were flouting the directives of the ministry. And to imagine a violence of this scale just arising out of ban on social media platforms, it's very difficult to believe that. But what has happened. And to discuss this, we have with us Professor Anshuman Behera, who is the professor in conflict and security studies at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Welcome to Samvad, Professor Behera.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayanji. Thank you for having me.
So, Anshumanji, I'll start with the first question. It took less than 48 hours of protest to enforce a regime change in Nepal. While the declared reasons, as I said, have been that there were social media platform bans and then some Gen Z revolution, which is very hard to understand as to what exactly is going on. This is still very, I mean, as a layman, one will find it, what should I say, confusing as to what exactly happened. So help us in understand as to what happened in Nepal in just 48 hours.
Thank you for this question. And this question is actually baffling a lot of the scholars and a lot of the thinkers to comprehend and to make sense with what exactly happened. As you rightly said, 48 hours is too little a time to actually, put a regime, out of its kind of position. And several of the ministers, in fact, all of them have actually resigned, and the Prime Minister has fled the country. So while it is very difficult to comprehend that it was a spontaneous, like so-called Gen Z kind of, protest in Nepal, one has to also understand what Nepal has been going through for the last 10 years. Why I'm saying last 10 years? In the last 10 years, we have what we witnessed in Nepal is actually a constitution in place, okay, and it was accepted by everyone. And then we have like the democracy in a truest form or to an acceptable form rather, was actually kind of established in Nepal. So we had multiple kind of governments forming there, governments going in, going out, coming in and going out. But then Nepal in last 10 years has actually gone through a lot. Is something that I'm saying in terms of governance, in terms of massive corruption, in terms of an entrenched, entitled kind of an elite. This has led to a rise of inequality in this country. Okay, and that is one part. We'll come to that later. But looking at this particular protest, one can very clearly say, and if it is not completely wrong to say, that while the foreign hand or the kind of conspirators of this protest is yet to be kind of found out, but one can have certain kind of doubt, kind of suspicion. The role of the external actors, that is one. Okay, why I'm saying so? Because in South Asia, the smaller countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, they are actually showing a kind of a trend or a trend of youth-led protest leading to regime change is going viral. It's going viral for the simple reason that there is a mismatch or there is a gap between the government and the governed. That is one. But at the same time, there is also this kind of foreign hand. What we saw in Bangladesh, the two examples I'll give you in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, the role of the external actors, like the direct role of kind of US in Bangladesh or China and US in Sri Lanka, where no, it is not very spontaneous. Things are actually engineered, and that
Mm,
lead to fueling unrest.
mm,
And now in Nepal, one has to also understand, when a country where the unemployment rate has actually gone up to 12.6% in the last year, how such tens of thousands of students actually hit the street
mm,
and actually vandalizing the property and setting the parliament, setting the Supreme Court building, setting the media houses, setting the kind of, the houses of the parliamentarians on ablaze. Okay. And this is in the last 15, 20 years is unheard of in Nepal. Though
mm,
there was kind of, a fight between the Madhesis and the hilly people over the regionalism and all that we have seen, there was blockade. And that actually continued for months together. So
mm,
the violence was completely dispersed and the violence was or not. And we have also the kind of news coming where the former Prime Minister Jalanath Kalal's wife has been burned to death.
mm,
Burned to death in the sense like that set her house on fire and she just could not come out and she was burned to death. So this kind of situation is, as you rightly said, a simple social media ban or a ban on the social media. If this has actually invited such anger, such
mm,
anxiety, such frustration among the
mm,
youth, there is a reason to be concerned. There is a reason to actually think over it. How, and why the youth who is actually suffering from so much of unemployment, suffering from nepotism, suffering from corruption for all these years, all of a sudden they have come. Okay. So while there are internal reasons which was actually the outrage was building up for a longer time.
mm.
Okay. And when that cannot be ruled out, okay, but at the same time, the role of the external actors or some kind of ill-meaning kind of individuals or the organizations remind you that few months back we had also a very minuscule but very important protest and kind of a demand to bring back the monarchy in Nepal.
Hmm.
Okay. And that said, okay, I'll just also say that in 2022, what we witnessed as the first indicator, if not warning, that Balendra Saha, okay, a musician, a rapper in Kathmandu,
Hmm.
was actually elected as the mayor of Kathmandu, one of the youngest mayors of Kathmandu.
Hmm.
Maybe that one has to actually, and now he has taken the center stage. Okay, he is now urging the protesters to keep calm, and protesters are actually looking up to him. That also creates a kind of a lot of theories to believe or
Hmm.
to kind of try to understand that whether there is a role of the monarchist, is there is a role of the the outsiders coming and fueling the unrest, or some people over ambitious people who want to actually take power into their hands, taking advantage of the already existing problems in Nepal.
There's one more person whom I need to mention at this point is Sudan Gurung,
Yeah,
who runs a Hami Nepal movement. These are all very, I mean, apparently very nationalistic sort of movement. Balendra
yeah,
Shah. Now, these two are people we don't know much about, because
yeah,
they have not been in the news except when this uprising has suddenly, the regime change has suddenly happened. So what exactly, apart from the rapper part, I mean, is he a politician? Are these guys politicians, or simply thrust into the limelight by, because what appears to me is it is not spontaneous, because it is very difficult to build up a protest of this sort, the
mm,
magnitude. Why would a spontaneous gathering, I mean, these are all my assumptions, why would a spontaneous gathering burn down the parliament? Why would a spontaneous gathering? I believe, I'm told that there was some attack on the Pashupati Nath temple also late night. I'm not very sure about it. It's not confirmed to me. I was
mm,
reading somewhere in the social media. Media houses. Why would you attack the media houses? So obviously something going on.
yeah,
And we have seen this trend with Zelensky in Ukraine, a comedian thrust into suddenly into limelight. Now we know
right.
that there was some change, some color revolution, which was led by the CIA in Ukraine. I'm not saying that CIA is working directly, but there is something very strange. So what do you know? What about these two people, Sudan Gurung and Balendra Shah. Who are they?
So let me start with Sudan Gurung. Okay, no, Balendra Saha first. Okay, Balendra Saha came to the limelight by 2020-21, when he was actually a rapper, musician in Kathmandu, and there was a strong, very heavy fan following for him. Okay. And I've been following him ever since. And in 2022 May, when he was elected as the mayor of Kathmandu, he was a big talk of the town. And after that, if you see the activities of Balendra Saha, he has been termed as a kind of an authoritarian mayor in Kathmandu, but targeting the shopkeepers, the roadside vendors in the name of streamlining business and all those things. There is a lot of kind of discontent against him among the public, like the people who are doing the petty business in Kathmandu. Okay, but his fan following was as constantly growing among the youth. Okay, and Sudan Gurung is another person. I would not call them as kind of established politicians, but they are certainly aspiring politicians. And as you very rightly mentioned, the case of Zelensky in Ukraine. This has been trained. One doesn't have to go far. The movie actors actually coming into politics. India has its kind of own share of kind of an experience to say. The recently the Bhagavat Man in Punjab. So people get attracted, and then when it is actually projected or soft to the people with wrapped with nationalist sentiment, or the sentiment where they can bring changes to the society, and this works in a society where there is a kind of vacuum of connection, communication between the state and its people. And Nepal and a place like Nepal or a Sri Lanka or Bangladesh are actually very suitable kind of conditions where there is a gap between the government and the governed. Okay, the people and this thing, and there is and these are the people who take advantage of it. So the modus operandi of these kind of organizations, okay, become successful when they are supported by an external actor. Okay, we have seen this, okay, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, but I will not be at all surprised. I will not be at all surprised if the foreign hand, because at this point of time, what is appearing is because of the internal problems, and these are kind of very spontaneous. These are kind of very organic. But as the time goes, okay, we'll definitely get to know whether someone from within is supporting it, and Balendra Shah, through his kind of career as a rapper and all that thing, has certain wealth, and the poverty trap, what we say, often actually invites, because recruiting people for this kind of protest is not very expensive. Okay, and you do not need too much of kind of funding involved. Okay, and in a country like Nepal, you need a very little funding to sort of get people, gather people, and once people are gathered, okay, and the youth that is on employment and has been going through a lot of deprivation, okay, they get a platform to vent out. I'm not justifying any of this, but what I'm saying is trying to understand the process. So for them, like the national monuments, the national or the buildings of national importance, they hardly matter anything, because if you the so-called Gen Z is also a kind of a generation that is the ultra freedom kind of a narrative is something that is driving them, and they always live in a virtual world. Okay, and the importance of these kind of physical monuments and all that holds very little meaning to them. Okay, if at all this is the definition of Gen Z. So I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm also very shocked to see the kind of violence. But at the same time, the state of Nepal has also read the situation absolutely wrong. Right, firing at the protesters, killing 19 odd people and injuring hundreds of others, okay, was an absolute miscalculation from the Nepalese police. They should not have actually opened fire, which gave a lot of legitimacy to the protesters to actually go and start burning the places that they did.
They not only burning the places, they're burning people, which is horrific. This. I don't think it happened in Bangladesh also. They're burning people alive. So,
Hmm.
but I'll extend this thing. You have been talking of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. There's one
Yeah.
commonality I see, that the protest, the states has just withered away in front of these protests. There have been no effort at all to reach out to the protesters, to speak to them, or impose the authority of the state in a manner which is different, rather than directly firing into groups of people. There have been no efforts by the state. So help us understand this melting. There has to be some phenomena, something wrong somewhere, that the states are just melting away against before unorganized crowds and mobs. Why is it
Yeah.
happening?
The why it is happening, one has to understand. I'll give you the example of India. It's not that India has not experienced or not experiencing at the present time such kind of protest. And look at the farmers' protest, the protest against the CAA, the Delhi riot. The magnitude and the scale of those protests was no less than what we are seeing in Nepal or Bangladesh. Okay, people who are actually holding and halting the communication for months together in the case of the farmer protest, and all sorts of elements are going and talking anti-India kind of thing, taking Northeast completely away from India and all those kind of things. That, but then what makes India stand out? Okay, is the resilience and the capacity of the state. Okay, and that is where when this protest, opposition, resistance, agitation, all those things is a routine affair in India,
Hmm.
whereas it comes as very very episodic in the places like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka.
Hmm.
And that is where what you see, that in India, while you have an elected government, in all these kind of countries we have elected authoritarian rulers, right? You have KP Oli kind of people, or Rajapakse, or a Sheikh Hasina, to call them absolute democrats or practicing democratic form of governance will not be entirely correct. So that when you have election is used to legitimize the authoritarian rule of these leaders, there is certainly a gap. There is absolutely a gap. But if you look at the commonalities in these three countries are the protests are absolutely youth-led. Okay, or presented to be youth-led.
Hmm.
Okay, that one thing is there. And they successfully brought down the ruling regime. That
Hmm.
is the second commonality. But
Hmm.
the issues around which they fought, okay, well, the governance, corruption, and democracy backsliding, these are some of the issues that remains constant. But Bangladesh stands out. Bangladesh is absolutely different. In the name of student protest, that was an Islamist backed kind of protest to actually, bring down a democratically elected government. Okay, of course, there are authoritarian traits of that particular, regime that apart. But in Nepal, so far, we have not come across the ethno-religious tone of this protest. Okay, we have not so far come across, because maybe it's a Hindu majority country, to the extent that more than 90% of the people are the Hindus. So there is absolutely no scope. But that also applies to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is also close to like 88% of the people, or 89, 90% of the people are actually Muslims.
Hmm.
But then there, that the radical Islam was trying to actually replace a moderate Islam. Okay, but here that is not the case.
Hmm.
But in the case of Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, the role of the foreign hand was very evident. Okay,
Hmm.
from it was very evident. But in the case of Nepal, it is yet to be explored. But that said, I think we'll have to wait for a couple of days to find out whether these are spontaneous, or it was homegrown, or some kind of an elements actually sponsored them.
Now, taking this idea of the foreign interference behind this whole violence is something I would like you to explain to us. Is the first of all, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the geopolitical importance of these places is totally different from the geopolitical importance of Nepal. It is important, still landlocked. China has been reaching out to Nepal in massive way. KP Oli was very friendly with China. I'm
Yeah.
not sure whether he's fled to China or going over somewhere else, but he was very friendly to China. The United States has long been interested in this part of the world, but we are
Yeah.
gradually seeing the Americans basically retreat. They are not exactly advancing themselves into countries, because they will not be able to govern this country in the first place. India will obviously, it has it has problems of its own. Obviously, it has never interfered in a sense of regime change, at least as far as I know. So what exactly would any foreign power would be looking while interfering into the internal dynamics of Nepal?
Hmm. I think okay, one has to actually understand the US and the long interest of US and the basically their foreign policy of regime change, the policy of regime change. And the policy of regime change, I have actually written in one of my papers recently on Bangladesh. This has been a stated objective of their kind of foreign policy for a long time. Okay. And then the democracy becomes the tool. They tried it through the Arab Spring, they tried it in say for example in Ukraine, they tried it in Hong Kong. Okay, and the South Asia is not immune to that. Okay, so the Bangladesh case was very clear where the Sheikh Hasina didn't budge the demand from coming from Biden to give the Saint Martin Island. But here you see the geopolitical and the geoeconomic dynamics have actually rapidly changed in last couple of months where India has asserted its kind of position, not actually giving in to the demands of Trump. Okay, and the latest kind of an SEO summit where China, India, and Russia came together, that has not actually been the US and its allies have not been able to digest it. Okay, and they are also seeing that okay, India and China, two Asian giants, in fact, two world powers at this point of time, whether they recognize or not, that is a different thing. India has its own standing right now. So they must be thinking that okay, if the neighborhood is actually peaceful, the neighborhood is actually remain democratic and all that, if there is no turmoil, there is no disturbance, okay, it is advantage to both India and China. Okay, Nepal has actually been a theater of contestation between India and China for a long time, starting from, say, the Khampa Rebellion of 1959, the monarchy coming to power, then the democracy, then the Maoism in Nepal, where India and China, on their own ways, they have been trying to assert their positions in different ways. Okay, to the extent that the China bringing BRI and Nepal being a signatory to that, and China actually proposing something like China, Nepal, India economic corridor, and India giving kind of very cold response to that. There is a lot of cold war, if I can phrase like say that in context of cold war between India and China over Nepal. Right, but China never had, or so far we do not have a kind of instance where China has mobilized the people to go violent. So we also do not have a kind of a record of mobilizing people of Nepal to go violent, okay, against each other. There could have been instances where Nepal favoring one regime and India favoring another. Okay, that has happened. As you rightly put, KP Sharma Oli personally has been very close to China. Okay, I do not see any reason for China to engineer something to upset KP Sharma Oli's regime. Okay, in fact, there are reports that China played a very important role, okay, in actually, breaking the coalition between the CP and Maoist, the Maoist center and the NC, and bridging the gap between the Nepali Congress and the UML to form a government headed by KP Oli. So I do not see the role of India, neither India nor China, actually instigating the protesters. So then comes, okay, given the geopolitical changes and the geoeconomic changes in the recent times, there is a strong possibility that the US has actually engineered this kind of protest. And the kind of protest that we saw in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka, I think it's a template kind of protest. But there is some rapper, some person actually coming, and it is, and how quickly you see that the Gen Z word was frequently used.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Gen Z, when you say that, okay, there they used the student protest against Sheikh Hasina. Okay, it was not a students' protest. If it was only a students' protest, like they would not have actually won. The army was not able to give protection to Sheikh Hasina. That shows that the students or the protesters were heavily armed, or the supporters were heavily armed, right? So you say that the Gen Z protesting here, you sensationalize and give it a digital kind of a hype.
Hmm.
Okay, and that is where legitimizing the movement that the next generation or the Gen Z, what they say, is not very favorable with the government. So that is where this is typical a US way of actually functioning, okay, or working towards the regime change. But I do not have any evidence right now to
True.
support my argument. This is based on what they have done in the past. I'm just trying to understand, right? So I have strong suspect that okay, this could be that could like the US interest in the Asia Pacific in the South Asia kind of thing could be a possible reason why the deep state or the CI backed kind of
Hmm.
institutes or organizations or the people have been well behind motivating the people.
Now I'll shift your focus to India, because there have been a pattern of this. I mean, this copybook has been tried out before, as you said before in your arguments. That this copybook has been tried before in India also, and we are still seeing parts of copybooks being done. I mean, there are experiments going on.
Mhm.
So, and yesterday, I mean, very distastefully, a number of Indian politicians came out and alluded to the fact that ये India में भी हो जाएगा तो क्या होगा, that sort of a thing, which makes no sense except from provoking people. So, what impact do you see this Gen Z revolution having on the Gen Z in India or Indian public per se?
Yeah. Very, very interesting. We have certainly the reason to be worried. Okay. Any country has a reason to be worried because there is a generation gap, and that the generation that is living on virtual world, it's a difficult generation to actually reason with and to handle. Okay. But that said, Anna, look at the state capacity of India. Okay, India is no Bangladesh, and India is no Sri Lanka or Nepal or Bhutan or Maldives. With all due respect to these countries, what these countries have lacked over after the post-colonial period, they have not been able to institutionalize their democracy. Where we have championed in institutionalizing our democracy. And in a society as diverse as ours, like India, it is but inevitable that there would be conflicts, there would be disagreements that we actually see it day in, day out. As I mentioned, a kind of anti-CAA protest, a kind of the farmers protest or a Delhi riot, every day in, day out. And these riots and these protests in scale and magnitude are no less than what Bangladesh saw or
Hmm.
Nepal experienced. And that said, we have our democratic institutions are so strong, so resilient that it will be difficult for any Gen Z kind of or any other kind of resistance to allow them to get over or allow them to succeed. That's it. The Gen Z of India and the Gen Zs of these countries are completely different. You look at Bangladesh, where extremist religious ideas and ideologies are actually spread among the Gen Z.
Hmm.
Okay. And the kind of an education, and the Bangladesh is a society that has the so-called Gen Z is deprived of an inclusive composite culture. They have not been exposed to the ideas of living with a neighborhood that is different from them culturally, socially, religiously, and otherwise. But look at our society. We have been living in a composite culture for thousands of years. No other country, I can very proudly say that hardly any other country in the world has this kind of socio-political exposure or to the population. So the Gen Z in India is while they're exposed to the latest devices and the latest kind of gadgets and the technological innovations, they're also exposed to this kind of cultural values. That is something most of the time we kind of understate or we kind of underestimate. But these kind of values of living, inclusivity, composite culture, living with together, and all those kind of fraternal feeling,
Hmm.
that has become one of the strongest points of India. As you rightly said, people have been trying the ill-meaning kind of civil society organizations or the copybook toolkit gang, what we say, they have been trying, but they have trying they are successful to the extent of being an irritant.
Hmm.
Okay, and of course they have caused a lot of problem. Okay, and but then the Indian state has the capacity and the resilience to withstand that. Okay, but at the same time, when I'm saying all this, I do not want to sort of say that we should be relaxed. We should not be relaxed. We should not be complacent.
Mm,
We should take everything and we should draw lessons from these kind of events in our neighboring country. But in a country like Nepal, any kind of such events has its direct and spillover effect on us.
mm,
Okay, people will be crossing borders. Okay,
mm,
when you have such kind of nothing, Nepal is going through tremendous poverty, unemployment, rising inequality, and what we'll see, because if you read the reports, sir, last year alone, okay, 7,40,000 people migrated from Nepal for the search of better jobs. For a country which is 30 million kind of in a population,
mm,
okay, almost like, one third of its population migrated in 1 year, it's a very disturbing signal.
mm.
Okay. And that means we are being the kind of, largest neighbor to them, and with a so huge boundary, the population coming from Nepal migrating to India will be a matter of concern. Okay. And we need to actually have our preparation, have all these things in mind to deal with them. But at the same time, I do not think that in the coming future, okay, such kind of events will have any kind of direct impact on the kind of democracy, the form of governance that we have, and the stability of any government, irrespective of the party line.
You spoke of the resilience of the democratic institutions, and all the more reason for us to be careful because we see a systematic, uh, gradual attacks on the institutions of democratic institutions to basically demean them, somehow lessen what they're doing, impugn motives to what they're doing. But coming to the final question, I mean, you've
Yeah.
been seeing Nepal for a very long time, the ups and the downs. What future do you see for Nepal?
Uh, so I'll tell you, Nepal has gone through a lot. Okay, if I start from 1950s, okay, we hardly have any period of stability. Okay, and then to make the situation worse, by 1996 we had this bloody Maoist insurgency, which caused a lot of violence. Okay, created a scene, created an atmosphere of fear, anxiety, apprehension, displacement. Thousands were killed, thousands were kind of displaced, and Nepal had to pay a heavy price, to actually restore democracy.
Mm,
Uh, and 2015, the finalization of the constitution and the implementation of the constitution, despite the disagreements between the Madhesis and the hilly people, okay, still there was some acceptability, there was some acceptance of this constitution. And unfortunately, the entrenched and the entitled elite, they rotated power among themselves for the last 10 years. Three people, this KP Sharma Oli, Sher Bahadur Dubey, and the Prachanda Pushpa Kamal Dahal, representing three major political parties, they actually kept on exchanging, the prime minister position and the government among themselves, and the people have taken note of that. Okay. So while the democratic protest is like a kind of a right, a genuine legitimate right of the people, but such violence is never kind of justified. Okay. So if the Gen Z, the so-called Gen Z or the youth have come on their own, this is a good sign.
mm,
But minus the kind of violence and the carnage that they have actually created. But if they have been mobilized by some external forces, they'll have to actually, introspect the
mm,
kind of damage they have actually caused to their own country, the kind of properties that they have damaged, okay, which stands as honor of, as a pride of their own country, right? But then the next possibility is an early election. Okay, now that the government has collapsed, the government has resigned, and that is the next possibility is the early election. So, is the Gen Z ready to fight the election? Or
mm.
the same entrenched kind of political elite will actually get into the electoral kind of a fall? If the same entrenched, entitled kind of politicians, political elite get into the elections, the result is very obvious.
True.
In that case, will the Gen Z be, prepared enough to come back and do all these things? Can this be a regular affair, routine affair in Nepal? I don't think the Gen Z can, because these kind of events are very episodic. They will come and they'll go. They will wither away, right? But then this is also certainly a wake-up call. Certainly a wake-up call for this elite that do not take your kind of population for granted. The Nepal political elite for a long time have taken their population for granted. Okay, the development projects are not taking up. There is a misappropriation, siphoning of the foreign funding and the loans they have. I have enough example to give how billions of Nepalese rupees have been siphoned away by a vicious nexus of the politicians, contractors, and the government officials, starting from the Pokhara International Airport to the Exim Bank, and all those things are there. Even the flood money, the money earmarked for the flood relief has been siphoned away by the incumbent government. So that said, there is what I see, either there is a drastic change in Nepal, if it is a spontaneous attack, kind of protest, if it is a manufactured one by the involvement of some ill-meaning and a foreign hand, then Nepal is again getting into a brink.
Anxious time ahead for Nepal, and as a good neighbor, we can only hope and pray that things settle down and the violence, first of all, settles down, because violence is never good for any society. On that note, I would like to thank you for sparing time for us, Professor Anshuman, and speaking to us. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.